Today I'm making Sabine Wren's helmet from Star Wars Rebels. Here we go. For this build, I used EVA foam, craft foam, coffee foam, putty, paint, super glue, a Chicago screw, face shield, or some substitute, I got a whole bunch, a heat gun, cutting tools, sanding tools, safety gear, scissors, razor pens, and a box cutter, and some other stuff. Power converters, kyber crystals, that sort of thing. I'm making this primarily out of EVA foam. The traditional way that people have done these helmets is with pepakura, which is folded paper and then solidify with resin. But where fiberglass will break, foam will just bend, absorb the impact, and bounce right back. First, I'm gonna make a template because some of these parts need to be identical. This will be available, linked in comments down below. Then I traced that, transferred it to foam floor mats, taking care to include the registration marks, those little triangles. Those will be instrumental in helping me line up the edges. I weighted the floor mats down with machinist blocks so the foam doesn't slide around while I'm working. I cut those out with a work knife, which I continually sharpened in order to keep the cut clean and uniform. I'm also being careful to make sure that my blade is angled perfectly straight up and down. This will prevent any ridges or depressions from forming in the foam after I join the two sides. I sanded away a few of the rough spots on my belt sander. This will create better adhesion when I eventually glue those together. Then I traced and cut out the side parts. This is sort of a generic Mandalorian template that I put together from one of my previous Mando helmets. I was freehanding them for a while, and then I was like, you know what, why don't we just eliminate some of this guesswork, you know? All the Mandalorian helmets are similar, so I can utilize some of my previous planning and legwork, but they all also have this uniqueness. They have these small little variations that make them all unique. So I'm gonna have to derive a new template from this one by the end of this video. And that's the one that I'm gonna make available to you guys. You know, some people get confused by the cardboard, and it's like, it's because I know I'm gonna make some mistakes, and I would rather waste cereal boxes than my cardstock. You know, make the mistakes on the cereal boxes, then send you guys the nice stuff. After I finished tracing the helmet side template, I cut it out. In addition to the registration marks, I also cut a dart in the top there, the thin triangle that's pointing down to the ear, which will help to turn this flat piece into a curved one. After it was cut out, I flipped the template and repeated those steps in order to get the other side. Next, I heat formed the pieces using my heat gun, not a hairdryer. When it was sufficiently heated up, I pressed it over half of a giant novelty Easter egg that I'm using as a planishing iron, or anvil, to help shape the foam into a curved piece, and then set the pieces inside of the Easter egg half to cool. This will help them retain their curved shape. I placed a smaller Easter egg on top in order to weight it down and attack it from both sides, so to speak. A few minutes later, it was cool, so I removed it and glued the seam together with super glue. Next, I heat formed the top piece. Now, admittedly, this would have been a lot easier if I'd made these two curved pieces separately, but I didn't want to have even the vaguest remnant of a seam in that pointed part, so I left them connected there to avoid that. And it turned out that once one of them had been heat formed, the other one was a lot easier to work with anyway. So I shaped that up, and once it was finished, I began gluing it together with super glue. Once the center was together, I glued on the sides. Somewhere in here I made the other side of the helmet, by the way. It's the same process, I just flipped the template to get the other one. Alright, so now we have a basic helmet. I actually got insanely lucky right there, because there's a flaw in this that can only be corrected by cutting that much off of the back of here. So I don't have to fill that in. I will have to transfer it to the template though. Once I'd taken care of that mistake, I cleaned it up on the template, and then I moved on to the details. First, the cheekbones. I cut them out of a scrap floor mat piece. Those interior cheek alcoves were a lot of guesswork. Trial and error that luckily you won't have to deal with. And in order to get them to fit perfectly, I cut the edges to be slanted. This will also create the proper angle. I did the one on the other side, and then I reheated the whole thing, partially to get the glossy texture to match, but also to even out the overly heat-formed areas of the helmet dome. Sometimes I end up overforming them just because it's a lot easier to reheat it and get it to form back than it is to finish an improperly heat-formed job to begin with. Then I worked on some of the more pronounced details, such as the antenna platforms, and then I made made the pieces that go behind the ears. Those have to be a bit flatter than the antenna bases, so I cut them in half with an extremely sharp knife, and after that I did have to clean up the surface a bit on the belt sander just because the knife wants to go off in various directions once it's inside there, so you get these extra bits of shale-like foam angles on the inside. And no one's gonna see that, but it's gonna cause it to not lie flush on the curved surface of the helmet, and it'll look lumpy on the outside. So I got rid of them, and of course put another one on the other side of the helmet. Hooray for symmetry! Then I put a band on the back of the helmet connecting the two pieces. There's also supposed to be a keyhole in the back, so I cut that out with various knives, so it's a little sunken alcove, which means you could just put that cutout back in and just sink it a bit, but that leaves less room on the inside of the helmet for the wearer, and also I didn't like that seam in there, so I cut up a new piece and glued it in. Then I got back to the antenna bases. This little piece goes in the center of the left one. There's also one on the other side, but there has to be room underneath it for the antenna to hinge, so I cut that in half, just like the behind the earpieces. Next, I made the antenna stalk itself. I use What the Foam for that. It's actually the brand name. This is because it's sturdier than floor mat foam. Not sure how much sturdier though. This is kind of an experiment. Last time I did this, I made the antenna out of 1/4 inch ABS plastic, and that one's held up, but I was trying to see if I could get through this project without using power tools. So, What the Foam. I punched a hole in the base of the stalk with a hole punch, go figure. I transferred that to the antenna base as well. I held it in place with a Chicago screw to act as a hinge. I did a test fitting on myself to make sure the antenna hinge wouldn't be uncomfortable, and that was a mistake because this template was not based on my measurements. I did notice, however, that the cheekbones were extremely uncomfortable, so I sliced those down with the work knife. The antenna needs a stopper to keep it from falling backwards or down below the eye line, so I made those out of craft foam as well. I guess I could have used wood or something, but I think that's a good place for the shock absorbency of foam, right? I also cut a hole in the outer piece just so that I could remove the antenna for maintenance if I ever needed to. Then I built the rangefinder out of scrap craft foam. I so wanted to use my pre-existing Mando templates, but Sabine's is a little different, so I made a new one and used a puzzle strip as the walls to give it depth. Once it was complete, I closed it up and attached it to the antenna stalk with hot glue. Now, while EVA foam doesn't weigh a lot to you or me, it is enough weight to make the whole antenna wildly unstable. So I put a stopper behind it to keep it from falling backwards or too far forwards. And I covered that with the piece that I made earlier. So the last female Mando helmet that I did was Bo-Katan's, which is a bit longer than Sabine's, so I had to trim this one down to match. And again, transfer that change to the template. Then I bent up a coat hanger and put it inside the helmet to help the helmet hold its symmetrical shape. I wanted to do that now before I painted it, because if you shape it after painting, it could put creases in the paint job. I also smoothed out the rough spots with my rotary tool, and then I filled in the seams with Alex Fast Dry. I think that actually took 3 layers. Then I began painting. First I did a layer of flat black because it dries the fastest, and the first layer, it's gonna get absorbed. It's really just so I can see if there are any outstanding imperfections that I'm gonna need to sand down later. Luckily, there weren't too many. So for the next layer, I used gloss black house paint, which dries shiny. To get that metal look, the base coat has to be shiny. That's why I'm emphasizing it. You really gotta go slowly with the antenna, particularly right here where it's gonna swivel, because you don't wanna glue it in place with the paint. In my case, it takes so long to edit the videos that I can just break up the painting process by editing for a little while, and when that gets monotonous, I can go back to painting, and it's all good. One more coat of black should even that out and make the whole thing shiny. When the gloss black paint had dried, I took it outside and spray painted it silver. And somehow, despite the fact that it's sunny outside right now, it got rained on, just despite me. Thanks, nucleogenic particles. Luckily, this is a fast drying paint and primer, so I was able to just dry it off and recoat it. Because I was fed up with the spray paint, I decided to make the visor out of a tinted office envelope this time, instead of using the nightshade spray paint like I used to do. As you can see, I've used this envelope before. For my standard Mando helmet, I traced my template with a dry erase marker and cut it out with scissors. Once it was cut out, I stuck it in the helmet. It's held in there with duct tape and foam supports. This was admittedly a very awkward process and difficult to film because the supports have to go in behind the shield. But after much finagling, I eventually got it in there. And that's it! And that's how to make Sabine Wren's helmet. Sabine is constantly repainting her helmet, and frankly, I like the metal look. So for now, that's how I'm gonna leave it. Hey, how you doing in there? No, don't strike a pose, those gauntlets are armed! Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this build, then you can head on over to the Patreon page and join these fine people who make these videos possible. Seriously, that ad revenue is a joke. An enormous amount of work goes into these builds, and they just would not happen without the support of my patrons, who, by the way, receive ad-free early access while ensuring the channel's survival. Because these builds take so long, while I'm working on the next project, you can check out the numerous past builds by following the links, presumably on your screen, and subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified of future uploads. Alright, happy crafting. See you later.